Right, well, I'm going to chairing a little session, mini session with two presentations, one of which is my own, so I'm going to have to chair myself to make sure that I'm on time. I don't have anyone to hold up cards to me, so I will do my best to keep it to 20 minutes. And then after I do a talk, I'm going to do a bit of a talk about comparing nutritional quality, essentially, of commonly consumed meat and edible insects. And then I'll pass over to Professor Kenichi Nonaka, who has very generously come all the way from Japan to kind of talk to us today about his 30 years of research on edible insects and the field work that he's been doing across the world and looking at edible insects. So that'll be a really fascinating talk. So, I'll start with me, a less fascinating talk. Right, here we go. So I work in a research group that looks at population approaches to improve diet and physical activity. We're doing a lot of work with the Oxford Martin School looking at kind of future food scenarios, global food scenarios, and looking at what is the likely health impact globally of these different kind of future food scenarios. So we do work on saying what's going to be the impact of climate change on health that's kind of mediated through changes in food scenarios, because changes in the food system, because of changes in yield and things like that. So my interest really comes from a health angle, okay? So this is where we come in. So I'm looking at kind of broad, what are kind of changes in the patterns of the way that people are eating, and how is that likely going to impact on people's health? So that's the kind of angle that I come across this field. And if we look at kind of global food systems and global food futures, there's a kind of well-recognised problem, which is, the global population is increasing. We're still on the upwards, a very quick upwards trend in terms of global food population, and the question being, how are we going to be able to feed this global food population as the population increases? So there's been work to say, okay, well, can we just, we know that yields are increasing. If we continue to increase yields, are we going to have enough food that's available to feed the future population? And the analysis seems to say no. If we just kind of continue current trends in food yields, which is the kind of dark lines here, then we're not going to have enough food that's available to feed the world population. We need to be hitting lines at these dashed levels up here in order to kind of be able to make enough food available on the land that's currently available. So what does that mean? Well, it means that the only way that we're going to be able to feed enough people, if we follow current patterns and current diet scenarios, is if we have to kind of deforest, make more space available for agriculture. So there's been a bit of work looking at, well, what does that mean in terms of forest area and how does this change? So this is some work that's been published in Nature Climate Change last year, which looks at, let's take current trends then in yield projections, current trends in GDP, current trends in population, and see how much land has to be dedicated towards agriculture by 2050 in order to feed the world population. And what we see is that by 2050, which is the darker green lines here, we need a big increase in the amount of land that's available for cropland, big increase in the land that's available for pasture, and hence a natural decrease in forest cover. It doesn't look like very much of a change, but actually that involves kind of deforesting a land size, the space of India, in order just to kind of have enough area available to feed global populations. And it's not just about land use. Of course, with deforestation, you get kind of releases of carbon emissions, and you get reductions in carbon sinks and those kind of things. So you get a big increase in greenhouse gas emissions related with the food system by 2050, which is already the food system, the global food system is already a huge global emitter. More than transport, food is a bigger contributor to greenhouse gas emissions than transport globally. And you also have a big problem with water use. You need a lot more water needed to kind of produce this food as well. So what's going on here? I mean, is there anything we can do to kind of to make that kind of future food scenario kind of more sustainable? Well, one of the big things that I'm sure you guys are all aware of is that the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions and to land use in terms of the global food system is livestock, particularly ruminant livestock, particularly beef and sheep, but also pigs and chicken as well have a much higher footprint than do cereal crops and fruit and vegetables. And here this is just an example of kind of one of the reasons why there's such a larger footprint for livestock than it is for kind of cereals and crops, is because essentially we have to kind of grow a lot of food. There's a real inefficiency in the system that we have to grow food in order to feed to the livestock before it kind of goes through to human consumption. So this is just a graph showing kind of about different food systems around the world and where that system where a lot of that is kind of being grown as feed for animals in order to be fed through, so you kind of miss that efficiency into kind of human consumption. And about 40% of global calories that are produced either for animal feed or for biofuel. So you've got this kind of inefficiency in the system. In terms of trends, in the UK, we're currently slightly increasing in total meat consumption over the last 50 years or so. We're currently at a kind of high level globally of meat consumption, and we're trending slightly upwards, but we're swapping away from kind of beef consumption, slightly coming down to more chicken consumption going up. But in terms of global trends, this is the kind of big worry in terms of future food scenarios. We see rises in meat consumption across all different regions, developing countries, lower middle income countries. And this is really kind of associated with increases in GDP across countries. We know that as countries move to a higher economic yield, the population move to a more Western-style diet of higher meat consumption. And this is just some work saying, okay, looking at the difference in greenhouse gas emissions, dietary greenhouse gas emissions between different food groups, different categories of eaters. So this is comparing real diets of vegetarians, vegans, fish eaters, and meat eaters, and looking at the carbon footprint of the diets of those consumers. And what we find is that vegans have about half the greenhouse gas footprint of meat eaters. This is in the UK. But actually, putting it that way, that vegans have half the footprint of meat eaters, is a bit of a disguises the full story, because it kind of suggests that, okay, well, maybe the only thing we need to do is encourage everyone to become vegan, which is perhaps a bit unlikely as an intervention. But actually, it's kind of gradated within meat eaters. So they kind of it's if we're encouraging people, if people just reduce their meat consumption, then we have also a big contraction in greenhouse gas emissions related to their diet. And indeed, at a global level, the researchers who put this both together in Nature Climate Change have looked at different possible scenarios, and one of the scenarios they looked at was a kind of healthy diet scenario with much reduced meat consumption and also reduced food waste. And they find under that scenario, actually, you can produce enough food to feed the world population on less land that's needed, and so you can actually start reforesting in that scenario. And it would have, as a consequence, it would actually have potentially could reduce greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture in that scenario, but still increase water use, because you need increases in yield in order to do that. So we're interested in our group about, well, would those sustainable dietary scenarios, would they be healthy? You know, if we force people into this path, are they actually, what's the kind of the health benefit that you'd be having there? And this is just some work that we currently got under review at PNAS, looking at this, which is looking and taking that healthy diet scenario that was modelled in that by Zelli et al. Paper, and looking at, okay, well, what would be the regional impacts if we move to that healthy diet scenario on health, mediated through changes in fruit and vegetable consumption and changes in meat consumption. And we find that globally it would be a very healthy diet. You'd be saving millions of lives by the year 2050 under the healthy diet scenario, mostly in developing countries, over developed countries here. But also, if we're moving to a kind of more extreme diets here, some more vegetarian diets or vegan diets, then you're actually increasing those health benefits as well as you move along. And why would that be? Well, the relationship between meat consumption, particularly red meat and processed meat consumption, and health outcomes has really kind of moved on in the last 5 years or so. So previously we were in the place where we kind of we knew there was health risks between meat consumption and certain forms of cancers and coronary heart disease, but kind of thought at very high levels of meat consumption. More and more researchers are looking at dose-response relationships to say, okay, well, is there actually, is there a risk relationship even at low levels of meat consumption? And what they find is that, yes, this seems to be the case. The evidence through observational data seems to be showing that even at very, very low levels of meat consumption, any extra bit of meat is actually increasing your risk. And it allows us to plot the kind of Big Mac mark, which is just here. So that would be an extra Big Mac a day, increasing risk of death by about 25%, according to this study in AGE. So that leads us to say, okay, well, it looks like we've got good synergies there. Basically, if you're reducing meat consumption, then potentially you've got health benefits. If you're reducing meat consumption, you've clearly got sustainability benefits. So we're looking at what are the different scenarios in order to potentially bring about a reduced meat future, which brings us to kind of the idea of edible insects as a potential alternative protein source to meat. And there's obviously very good reasons that I'm not going to go into now, that we know that kind of insects, in terms of insect farming, in terms of insect consumption, has got a much smaller kind of footprint than meat consumption. So it leads us to our research questions. What we're doing a couple of bits of work around this. First to say, well, what do we know about the nutritional content of edible insects? What data is there that's out there that tells us about what is the nutritional quality of edible insects, and then beyond that to then say, well, can we make any statements about edible insects, their overall nutritional quality in comparison to commonly consumed meat? So we did a systematic review, first of all, on nutritional content of edible insects. What we did was we came through the literature to try and find anything that's produced food composition tables for different insect categories that we kind of introduced in order to kind of start filling out our kind of database, just to say, well, here's the range of nutritional quality within different insect species. And then what we did is we compared that against data that we found on the InFoods website, which is just kind of nationally available food composition tables for different meat categories. So what we did was we found anything in the InFoods database that was beef, chicken, pork, or offal. So we obviously found quite a lot of different lines there for different cuts of these different meats. And we kind of put those together and grouped them up as beef, chicken, pork, and offal here. And we also got 62 data lines that we identified from our systematic review for a variety of insects. The data here we've got on crickets, honeybees, silkworms, mopani caterpillars, palm weevils, and mealworm. And then we can start comparing across the two of them. So the first thing we did was just compare just straight individual nutritional quality. So we're looking at things like protein sources of different meats and insect categories, saturated fat, and some of the micronutrient qualities. But we also wanted to be able to make kind of overall assessments of the total nutritional quality. So there we used something called nutrient profile scores. Now, nutrient profile models are models that have been developed that can categorise or rank foods based purely on their nutritional quality, okay? So basically what you do is you say, okay, well, this food's got this much saturated fat, this much salt, this much sugar, and we combine that into one kind of composite score, and then you can rate foods against each other. We use the model, it's called the Ofcom model, that's used in the UK in order to rank foods to decide which foods can be advertised to kids, because it says over a certain threshold that food's too unhealthy to be advertised to kids. And that's really a kind of over-nutrition model, if you like. That's primarily based on energy density, saturated fat, sugar, and salt. Okay? And we also looked at a different kind of model called the nutrient value score, which is much more about the micronutrient density of the food. So this one is much more based on, it's got calcium, iron, iodine, vitamin A, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, and vitamin C. So that one kind of deals with the kind of the micronutrient quality of the foods. The Ofcom model deals with more of the kind of the macronutrient, the kind of the nutrients that you probably want to be kind of reducing. So we've got two different ways of kind of looking at these foods. So what did we find? Well, when we look at kind of individual, the first thing is we find, and you guys are going to say this is obvious because you guys work with edible insects a lot, but I think it perhaps wasn't as clear if you see it in the kind of common literature, which is that insects have obviously a very wide variety of nutritional content. A basket statement around kind of a blanket statement around the nutritional quality or the healthiness of insects as all is kind of a pointless term, because there's a great deal of variety in terms of insects that are consumed and the nutritional quality of insects that can be consumed. So here we find, for example, when we're looking at protein sources, that mopani caterpillar very high in protein compared to meat products over on the side, but there's a lot of variety within there. Similarly, when we're looking at saturated fat, we find palm weevil very high in saturated fat according to our systematic review, but generally got a lot of variety there. And here again, we just picked out iron as one of the micronutrients that we looked at, very high in some levels, obviously extremely high here in honeybees, but a great deal of variety there. So that's why we wanted to put the nutrient profile score on them, so we can kind of compare across different kind of nutrients and come up with individual scores for foods. And here what we did was, so we did an awful lot of comparisons because we all got an awful lot of insect categories and an awful lot of meat categories. So we did Bonferroni adjustments, so we only kind of identified where there was a statistical difference if there was kind of beyond this Bonferroni adjustment kind of to deal with the fact that we're doing an awful lot of comparisons. What we found when we were using the Ofcom model, so if you remember this is the kind of the overnutrition one, this is the one that identifies foods that are kind of particularly bad in an overnutrition context, so it's about saturated fats, salt and sugar primarily. We found that there's no insects there, according to the Ofcom model, which were found to be kind of significantly healthier than meat products. We found that the offal from livestock turned out within this model was significantly healthier than crickets, palm weevils and mealworms, so some of the insects there. And all of the meat categories were significantly healthier than the palm weevils, which is to do with the fact that I showed earlier with the palm weevils very high in saturated fat. When we did the NVS model, which was about undernutrition, so it's much more about micronutrient density, we found that the insects, some of the insect categories anyway, crickets, palm weevils and mealworms, all significantly healthier than some of the meat categories than beef and chicken. So we found some evidence there that insects might be kind of healthier, if you like, or better nutritional quality when you consider micronutrients, when you consider macronutrients like saturated fat, then not necessarily the case. First conclusion of this research is really that the nutritional quality data on insects was poor. We didn't find anywhere near as much nutritional quality data on insects as did for meat products, and so that needs to be kind of expanded before you can make any kind of certain definite statements about the nutritional quality of insects as comparison to more conventional meat. There's great variety in the nutritional quality of different insect species, which again I think is not going to be a surprise to people here. And really what we're saying, this is just a kind of starting point. We need to know much more about the nutritional quality of insects before we can start making statements along the lines of promoting insects as a healthy option. But we also need to know much, much more about how insects are consumed, what kind of dietary patterns insects are consumed in, to know more about what an insect-eating diet looks like about whether it should be one that we should be recommending. And beyond there, eventually, although this is, I think, a long way off because we just aren't out there in the science in the slightest, but we need to be striving, presumably, if we want to get a proper handle on the health impact of edible insects, to looking at longitudinal studies that actually compare insect-eating groups with non-insect-eating groups and start looking at actual health impact in those populations. So that's it. So I'll just acknowledge my co-authors and the GB Sasakawa Foundation, which funded this research work, and that's it. So thank you. So, any questions?
Can you share these slides with us as well over email?
No. Sorry, Charlotte. Oh, are we doing straight into Nonaka and then questions afterwards? Okay, sorry. So that was a very simple clarification point. I don't see any reason why not. I'm just going to check with Charlotte. Charlotte, are we okay for sharing slides? Does everyone agree to that?
I was going to ask all presenters if it would be okay to share slides with every single person who registered for the workshop, because a lot of people who weren't able to make it today said that they really would like to see the slides and materials anyway. Also, all of the audio is being recorded for this and will be available online as well.
So we will have to check with the presenters to see if they're okay. Certainly, I'm not bothered, so you can certainly have my slides. So with that, we'll introduce Nonaka to give us a presentation, and afterwards we'll do a bit of a joint question and answer session. Okay, well, let me just set you up. Have you got slides?
Yes.
Oh, all right, here we go. It's this one, yeah?
Yeah.
Here you go.
Okay.
Is it there and there? No problem.
Hey, good morning. So insects are important natural resource both for self-sufficiency and as commercial food products in many parts of the world, you know. So 2,000 species are known as edible. They also reflect regional preferences and social cultural significance, which can be described in terms of regional differences. Preference vary geographically and historically. Clearly, mutual relationship arises between humans and the natural environment through use of insects. How people recognize with insects and suitable for food. How they can find and catch them, and for what purpose they eat them. Recently, insects have become regarded as an alternative or new food resources, and their use as food revealed in many areas in the world. Food insects are, however, still sometimes described as food for the poor or something strange or odd. In reality, however, people who have used them as their local food eat them for their delightful cuisine and enjoy the process of collecting them. These pictures of insect cuisines confirm their appeal. There are also high commercial value in many countries. In this study, focus on the system of traditional practice and the socio-cultural implications of people's references. I have conducted field surveys describing uniqueness or special characteristics of the custom and the reason for the existence in social spheres. I'm going to talk about how I have learned from them as well as from people in my country. The first case is that of the San living in the central Kalahari Desert in Botswana. They are known as last hunter-gatherers. So they use many of natural resources in their environment for food. In general, we imagine they are brave hunter and gatherers and collect lots of plants there. So we might think insects are of less value to them as food resources as they are tiny. Among them, however, insects are also food resources. I'm showing some examples here. In human gathering activities, they sometimes pick the bottom of the shrimp with their digging stick in order to find their nest of ants. They tap the mouth of the nest by hand in order to get the soldier ant. So they tap the mouth of the nest by hand in order to get the soldier ants out. They collect them quickly, otherwise they get bitten. The wild vegetables are prepared at home for food, and the ants were added to the dish. Finally, the foreshiming of the ant provided sour taste. That is to say, as ant salad dressing. Another example, the jewel beetle that appears in midsummer was also eaten by the sun. They ate it with berries by crushing them together. They said it added the rich flavor of jewel beetle to the sweet and the sour berries. I evaluated the food waste from the stamping. So, as a result, so they have established 10 ways of stamping which make different taste, texture, and independent word. As a result, they mentioned that these insects were tasty and used as spices to add flavor to other food. So I realized they are sensitive to food and then asked the taste of insect. So, as a result, so they mentioned the unique word of flavor, taste, and texture about each insect. Here is the table, the words they used. For example, the taste of goo applied for most of the insects. That's a taste. The fatty and rich in flavor, as good as roasted or eland meat, which they like most. These facts show that edible insects are utilized for food because of their quality. So through the participant survey in half a year in summer, I found the contribution of insects to diet as food resources. However, the seasonality limited in rainy season with noted annual fluctuations. They also collected and ate some species insects even though they were always available in small quantities. But they make good use of edible insects, increasing the variety and repertoire of their diet. As a result, It concluded that edible insects in general, in spite of their scarcity, provide these people's diet with more spice than subsistence. Caterpillars are normally regarded as reliable food resources, as one can collect a large amount of them easily, and they are rich in fat and protein. The sun also eats caterpillars frequently. They take out the intestine from the body, and only the abdomen is eaten. After roasting in the hot ash, this is a common way to prepare the caterpillars. The mopani worms, the caterpillar of the Saturnid moss, mentioned at Peter's presentation. The most famous edible caterpillar in southern Africa, which is highly recommended as delicious, regarded as the same way as meat. The large amount of dried caterpillars after process are stored for further needs and were sold to the market in station or local shops are all year round. The amount for one meal, however, is not so much as it's rather expensive compared with cattle meat. So when we visited Zimbabwe with Charlotte and were given mopani worm, cooked one at the restaurant, so only Charlotte, who is looking happily at the mopani worm, could eat them with pleasure. We have same story in Japan. Back to 40 years ago, when firewood was still used for cooking at home, people in mountainous area ate the caterpillar of beetles found in wood to make firewood. The caterpillars are easily collected from the wood and eaten as a snack for kids. I have heard many old men reminiscing about their fond memories of the caterpillar's sweet, delicious taste. So how can you imagine the taste simply from listening to this old man? I had the opportunity to today. So one body or one bite reminds the taste of memory actually. They were quite delicious. They made me they are happy, just like the old man recalling times when they used to eat them in his childhood. So now I'm going to change the focus my talk to food insects in Southeast Asia. The use of insects as food is very diverse among the non-Islamic Asian countries. In Laos, seasonal variation in land use provides a variety of natural resources that can be used for food products. Shown in this picture, a variety of animals and plants living in paddies, adapting themselves to conditions they are throughout year. Small-scale fishing for fish and other aquatic creatures is widely practiced when there are water covers. The mosaic of paddy field and wood, the blurring of boundaries between the human and the natural world, is most evident in Asia's most characteristic feature, rice cultivation. 40 insect varieties are found and eaten in and around the paddy field shown in this picture. Another fact is actually many species of insects are eaten, but the suitable for food species or life stage are selected. I'm going to talk some examples of the insect use. One of the most typical and essential species is wild cricket. They are collected beside the paddy field by digging the nest hole one by one from underground. Women also engage in the work to sell them to the market as well as home consumption. They are pounded into the paste with chili and herbs and eaten with sticky rice. The fried cricket is also nice with beer. The intestines of crickets are removed carefully before cooking, as in the case of the sun. Here is another good example. So it's a weaver ant collected in the forest around the paddy field in the mid-dry season. Women are busy collecting weaver ant in the forest. It makes a nest on the tree Women prepare special tool with a rod and basket. When they find the nest, they pick the nest and larvae, pupae, fall into the basket. The soldier ants are very aggressive and climbing up me, trying to bite me while I'm taking a picture. So it's very dangerous. So after removing the adult, the larvae and pupae are cooking as soup, omelette, and salad. It reminds me of dangerous memories. So, women earn good wages by collecting and selling them. Collecting insects doesn't require so much time and energy as other paid work. Women can get more opportunities to engage in, while insects have good commercial value following fish and bamboo and mushrooms. The demand for insects on the market is increasing in cities of Laos and Thailand due to population growth attributed to urbanization. People's improved economic situation makes the insect more affordable. There are specialist stores selling only insects and also stores selling them as a rice accompaniment alongside vegetables or fresh fish. Their prices are by no means cheap. They are vegetable delicacies. So they also very particular about selecting good quality, tasty insects. Their taste is described as man. It's Thai and Lao language, which means they have strong, oily taste. Some insects smell good, some are spicy or really sour. They are real cuisine. So traditionally, they are collected or reared by people as part of self-sufficient lifestyle. In Asian cultures, meals are composed of rice and side dishes are usually accompanied by alcohol drinks such as beer, spirits, or rice wine. Insects are used as seasonal side dishes. They say that the reason to eat natural food resources such as insects is to intake the nature into their bodies, which makes healthy. They say that they understand what the creatures living in nature feed, but they are not sure what cultured one fed. That is why they don't prefer to eat them. This means that their understanding to insects and nature is coming from the concept people are incorporated with nature, not divided. Here is another example of diverse use of the land. In the mid-dry season, nothing on the paddy field. So can you imagine? So what is found for food there? So that is a dung beetle from underground. So it's a great food. So in particular, the larvae and pupa can do dung beetle feeding on water buffalo dung. The boys know the place and the timing. The larvae are collected just before they transform into pupae. When they are at their best, they say that larvae are very good stewed. I was so impressed that the boy knows the time to harvest them for underground. So these insects are used is related with rice cultivation and change of land through the year. People use insects as creatures as they appear there. So I have conducted a food diary survey of the people in 3 villages in Laos in order to clarify the diverse use of natural resources for food from the frequency. This is just one example of the result, which show monthly tendency of the number of insects eaten and their frequency. It shows that most people who like them eat insects every day, but the range is wide. So I'm now studying the multiple use of termites and termite mound. At first, I thought the termite mounds are an obstacle to farming rice. But diverse resource use are collected from the mound, such as trees and plants, mushrooms, and other wild animals, including termites themselves. The soils of the termite mound is used for fertilizer, which is suitable and sustainable because the termite rebuilt it. The third story is about Japan. So 55 species are recorded as edible in a report of 90 years ago. The habit of collecting and eating insects connected with rice culture as well. Among them, the grasshopper, wasp, silkworm, caterpillar, or the longhorn beetle, and aquatic crab are popular. This is rice boulders of wasp. So, Charlotte again, she also enjoyed insect food on the first day in the village, where she stayed for 2 years. The distribution of habit was made spirited among Japanese, but the number have declined actually. We eat some insects and their regional variations shown in this map. Grasshoppers are eaten widely in Japan. The numbers have, however, decreased in Japan. Large quantities are imported from other countries for commercial consumption. When they eat self-sufficiently, they can collect in the neighboring paddy field. The woman in this picture is my mother. So she likes collecting them since her childhood and want to go every year, even she's aged. It requires work from early in the morning, as it's easy to collect grasshoppers while wet in the morning dew. However, she enjoys collecting them. They keep grasshoppers alive in one night after collecting so as to take the dung out. The next day, they are fried and boiled. Then the leg and removed as they are not suitable to eat. After being sun-dried, they are cooked in soy sauce and sugar. They are eaten as a side dish in the autumn. Some people keep them for a year. Charlotte also enjoyed collecting the harvest of grasshoppers. Wasps, which appear as a program, are popular as food in mountainous Japan. Yellow jacket called hebo in a dialect, in particular, are eaten in many areas. Wasp eating in Japan, for example, illustrates how people enjoy both collecting and eating as a part of their culture. The indirect hebo. The hebo nests are found below ground in the fields and mountains, making it rather difficult to locate them. Local people have devised a unique, ingenious way to locate the nest. I'm going to explain more detail as we are going to enjoy eating hebo rice for lunch today. So, bait is used to attract to worker wasps. The wasps are then given small pieces of meat with tiny ribbons attached to carry back to the nest. The ribbons make it easier to subsequently follow the wasps and locate the nest. Following the workers back to the nest requires teamwork. Someone is needed to set the bait, someone to follow the wasps to run, and someone to dig out the nest and sedate the wasp inside with smoke. Some people even raise hebo at the bottom of their gardens. They are careful to place the nest somewhere where it will be sheltered from the elements. The wasps are protected from predators and given food. Rearing hebo requires a certain combination of tender, loving care and originality and ingenuity. So Charlotte also enjoys harvest. She has a lot of experience. So some people rise to the challenge to collect the vespers, which is more dangerous because of their strong attack and poison. But it's bigger size and delicious. Bravely, they chase the workers to the nest and dig it out. Special protective suits preventing attacks by the wasps has been developed. The recipes for the wasps' dishes vary greatly from household to household, bringing an autumn feast to the dinner table. They also provide the ideal accompaniment for sake, for the products made from wasps are popular delicacies and make great souvenirs. So that food waste and the skills of collecting development integrated and has a regional differentiation as shown in this map in central Japan. It presents cultural zones. So especially the Kusha, where Charlotte lives, and her friend and supervisors also come to visit. So here the Kushara, the season is very beautiful from April to autumn. The winter is very cold. It's a mountainous village on the mountain. So in the springtime, so cherry blossoms so beautiful. And Charlotte enjoys the season, and the people in the village enjoy the hebo. And Pete came here, they enjoy talk, singing, and discussion with them. And the Nordic Food Lab also made a film with their lifestyles and food. So here is the last conference in Wageningen University. So there's a big conference for food, insect food and feed. The people in Kushara also exhibited their food culture, and many people practiced them. And we provided the gohei, which is a special cuisine of using hebo here. So unfortunately, I couldn't prepare the gohei mochi, but instead of that, I'm going to prepare hebo sushi, a style of Japanese food. The use of insects are part of subsistence and daily life. Relating people with the natural environment which is regarded as cultural resources. Reflecting rich biodiversity. Other point is that people can easily gain access to collect insects, which means that there can be very close relationship between people and insects. Thus, they develop a familiarity with insects. So starting from the study of geographical research of the wasp-eating habit in Japan as my academic career, I have learned lots of things from the people who eat insects. It's the humanity, the creativity and possibility through the use of insects in the long tradition and the continuous development. This manga illustration shows how for people who live on insects, loving, caring, and enjoying eating all come together through their relationship with insects. The grandfather loves hebo wasps more than his wife to give feed, more luxurious feed than his family eat. The family, however, pleased to eat hebo cuisine as seasonal feast, and knowledge will be succeed to the next generation, and they have got to know the importance of the local environment communities. The people eating insects have established various techniques of collecting and cooking for a large variety of insect species, reflecting regional preferences with a long tradition of socio-cultural significance. Here I mention three characteristics of insect use. The first is the diversity of insect use in daily life. The second is the awareness and the utilization of insects in places where human activity and natural environment match. The third is the role of insects in social cultural communication. So I hope you look at my poster presentation for more information from the fieldwork. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was fascinating stuff to see. Just harvesting of insects, I suppose. I just think it's really Fascinating work. Any questions? We don't have a great deal of time for questions, but we have some from the floor. If anyone has questions? I have a very quick question. So a lot of the societies where you've seen insect consumption, it seems to be the norm to crush the insect, to kind of... That seems to be the way to eat it. And I thought that was unusual. I mean, it's the... You know, I suppose if I'm comparing with seafood, people are kind of happy with the kind of unusual look of seafood, but they seem to be crushing insects. Do you know why? Any thoughts on that?
Yes. One reason is to mix taste and make the new, how to say, new
Texture.
Texture and mix the taste, each different taste, and make another taste. And in Laos, they like to pan. It's because of they eat when they eat sticky rice. Take one portion and put in some side dishes and eating.
So it'd be like a side dish.
That's easy to eat.
Questions?
Peter, I've got a question for you about the comparison work that you did between this. How did you make sure that the original recorded, the people who originally did the analyses that then went into the databases had actually standardized the form of each sample so that you weren't comparing wet insects with dry meat or
we did
insects?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, again, very difficult because you're stuck with a place where there's little data availability, and indeed in a lot of the data lines that we turned up for the systematic review of the insects, there's little information there about those exact details. Is this kind of dry, raw insect waiting for its kind of cooked? What's the kind of process of where it's at? So we did have criteria to be included in that review in the same way as we did for the meat, actually. So the meat, it was raw, uncooked meat that we were comparing, and we were trying to get the same with the insects. So it was raw, non-dried, non-smoked, kind of non-prepared. So we were trying to compare like with like. But actually comparing like with like is very difficult, I think, in this regard, because I suppose the overall assumption that what we're doing here is to suggest that insects are, in a sense, an alternative to meat, in this regard. And how insects are consumed as an alternative to meat is really kind of difficult to kind of really kind of narrow down and kind of get a good boundary on. I don't think we understand that very well. So we tried to have as comparable an assessment as possible. I'm not sure if we did a perfect job of it. I think we did as good a job as we could do.
It's a good start. Yes. Thank you.
More questions?
I was interested in some of the graphs you put up about the nutritional content. And cattle, the sheep and the poultry, I think was very, very similar, whereas it's much more divergent with your insect species. So how much is that to do with what the insects are being fed, and what's the implication for manipulating that enhance particular nutrients?
I'm going to put my hand up right now and say I don't know, right? Because that's well outside of my field of research. That is certainly when I look at that, and we've had discussions about that. That's what we assume is going on, which is that insects are going to be, the nutritional quality are going to be very dependent on the feed and where they're raised and all of this, in a way that perhaps kind of larger livestock are not. But that's with a big factor on here. I'm not a kind of nutritional scientist in that way. I don't know what the evidence is around there. Certainly I think that's what it suggests to me when I see it now.
But on that, I mean, there's going to be differences in insects and mammals in the sense that insects are reached at different stages in the life cycle. I mean, with mammals, obviously we eat eggs, but we don't. But once they've got to be young, they're going to be roughly the same throughout their life, I should imagine. But insects are obviously very diverse in their nutritional content depending on their life stage. Especially when you compare it with eggs, or the people, the early stages of the insects, that the larval stages would probably be more comparable with eggs in that sense.
Right, just one more question. Yeah.
I've got a question to Professor Nonaka, which was a very fascinating explanation of at the different uses and how the different insects are eaten and collected. One thing that struck me was that almost all of them are collected from the wild. There's very few farming, so to say, going on.
Yes.
So I have two questions. How do you see the prospects for some of these insects being more farmed in the future because of rising demand, and what would that mean? And also, do you see the impact of environmental changes on the availability of these insects, and how will that change in the future? What's your assessment of that?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So actually, I told as Laotian cases, they prefer the wild insects than the cultured one because the taste is different, and they are thinking from intaking from nature is very important. So, but now the population growth and urbanization. The demand of eating insects are getting increased. So the countryside, the number of the harvest is decreasing actually. So we must think of how to sustainable collecting.